A sprawling mansion, a brutal boss, a housekeeper trying to stay invisible. It was supposed to be a simple job: clean the marble, avoid the men in suits, keep your mouth shut. But one night, a single whispered lullaby echoed through the empty halls, a melody no one was supposed to know. When the most dangerous man in the city corners you in the dark and whispers, "Who taught you that song?" your answer dictates if you live or die. Listen closely. You don't survive in the Rossi household by being good at your job. You survive by being entirely unnoticeable. Claire learned this on her second day. She had dropped a silver serving tray in the hallway, just as a meeting was letting out of the West Wing. 3 men stepped into the corridor. One was bleeding from the temple. The other 2 looked like they wanted to cause more of it. They stopped staring at the rattling silver on the hardwood. Claire didn't apologize. She didn't look up. She dropped to her knees, scooped up the metal, and backed into the alcove, keeping her eyes glued to the baseboards until the heavy leather-soled shoes walked past. They didn't see a woman. They saw the grey uniform. They saw the furniture. That was 6 months ago. Now she was an expert at being furniture. The Rossi estate sat on 30 acres of prime New York real estate, a fortress masquerading as a Gilded Age revival. It smelled constantly of lemon polish ozone from the security gates, and faintly underneath it, all cold, damp earth. Claire woke at 4:30 every morning. She scrubbed her face with cold water, tied her dull brown hair into a knot so tight it gave her a headache, and put on the grey dress. She wasn't here by choice. No one scrubs floors for a syndicate boss for the health benefits. Her brother Tommy had a gambling problem that morphed into a theft problem, which finally evolved into a debt problem. The people he stole from didn't use collection agencies. They used men who broke kneecaps in dimly lit garages. The head housekeeper, Mrs. Gable, a severe woman who ran the staff like a military unit, was Tommy's landlord. She made the arrangement. Claire works the estate, takes a fraction of the pay, and the rest goes to buying Tommy's oxygen. A neat, quiet transaction. Library today, Claire. Mrs. Gable snapped, passing her in the industrial kitchen. "Mr. Rossi is in the city until late. I want the bookshelves dusted, all of them. And don't disturb the papers on the desk. You breathe on them, you're fired." Claire nodded. "Yes, ma'am." She took her cart and headed toward the east wing. The library was a cavernous room, 2 stories high, lined with dark mahogany, and books that looked like they hadn't been opened since the turn of the century. It was Leo Rossi's sanctuary. Claire had only seen the boss a handful of times. He wasn't the boisterous, cigar-chomping caricature from the movies. Leo was in his late 30s, tall-built with the lean, functional muscle of a man who didn't trust his bodyguards to do all the heavy lifting. He had dark hair, usually a mess, and eyes that looked like they were constantly calculating the structural integrity of the room and the people in it. He looked perpetually exhausted. She began her work. Spray wipe polish, move the ladder, climb, spray wipe polish. Her hands were raw from the chemicals. The knuckles cracked, weeping tiny beads of blood that she quickly wiped away so they wouldn't stain the wood. It was quiet in the house today. The rain had started around noon, a steady, rhythmic drumming against the bulletproof glass of the floor-to-ceiling windows. She liked the rain. It drowned out the ambient noise of the estate, the muffled shouts from the basement, the constant low hum of idling black SUVs in the driveway. By 7 in the evening, her shoulders were burning. She was at the top of the rolling ladder, wiping down a row of encyclopedias. The house was supposed to be empty. The security detail was outside, huddled in the guardhouse. The rest of the staff had retreated to the kitchens for dinner. Claire was alone, or so she thought. She paused, leaning her forehead against the cool wood of the shelf. She closed her eyes. The fatigue was a heavy, wet blanket over her bones. To keep herself awake, to keep her hands moving, she started to hum. It wasn't a conscious choice. It was a reflex, a defense mechanism she had picked up years ago. The melody was old, ragged, and melancholic. It wasn't in English, though she barely knew the words anyway. It was a phonetic memory, a lullaby about a sparrow freezing in the snow, refusing to fly south. It dropped in a minor key, rising sharply before fading into a long, sustained note. She hummed it softly, the vibration buzzing in her chest. Hush now, the winter is long. The sparrow stays, the sparrow dies. She moved to the next book. Her voice grew a fraction louder, filling the silence of the library. It felt good to hear something human in this house of ghosts. Down below, the heavy oak door clicked shut. Claire didn't hear it over the sound of the rain and her own voice. She just kept humming, dragging the cloth over the leather bindings, lost in a memory of a dingy hospice room in Boston, a radiator clanking in the corner, and a dying woman holding her hand. The temperature in the room seemed to drop. It wasn't a draft. It was a physical weight in the air, a sudden, suffocating pressure. Claire stopped humming. Her hand froze midway across a gold-leafed spine. The hairs on the back of her neck stood up. She turned her head slowly, looking down from the top of the ladder. Leo Rossi was standing at the bottom. He was wearing a dark charcoal suit. The jacket unbuttoned, his tie loosened. He looked completely soaked. Rainwater dripped from his hair, staining the collar of his white shirt. He wasn't moving. He wasn't breathing. He was staring up at her entirely still, like a predator that had just caught the scent of blood on the wind. Claire's heart slammed against her ribs. She swallowed hard, her throat instantly dry. She had broken the cardinal rule. She had made herself known. "I'm sorry, Mr. Rossi," she whispered, her voice trembling. "I was told you were out until late. I'll leave right now." She started to climb down the ladder, her hands shaking so badly she almost missed a rung. She kept her eyes on her scuffed black shoes, waiting for the harsh dismissal, or worse, the cold silence that usually preceded violence in this house. He didn't move out of the way. As her foot hit the floor, she was forced to stop. He was standing less than 2 feet away. The smell of cold rain, expensive bourbon, and something metallic rolled off him. "Sing that again," he said. His voice was a low rasp. It didn't sound angry. It sounded hollowed out. Claire clutched the dust rag to her chest like a shield. She kept her eyes pinned to his chest, terrified to meet his gaze. "Sir," "The song," Leo said, stepping closer. The proximity was overwhelming. He was a large man, and his presence took up all the oxygen in the space. "Sing it again." I don't know the words, sir," Claire stammered. "I was just humming. It was stupid. I'm sorry to have disturbed you." She tried to step around him toward her cleaning cart. A hand shot out. His fingers wrapped around her upper arm. The grip wasn't crushing, but it was absolute. An anchor of bone and muscle holding her in place. Claire gasped, finally looking up. She expected to see rage. The men in Tommy's orbit always had rage in their eyes, but Leo's eyes weren't angry. They were wide, frantic, and entirely unmoored. The calculating boss was gone. In his place was a man looking at a ghost. "Who taught you that song?" he whispered. No one," Claire lied instinctively. The golden rule of survival: minimize information. "It's just something I heard." Leo's grip tightened just a fraction. Not enough to bruise, but enough to make a point. "Don't lie to me, not about this." His chest rose and fell heavily. "That is an old Calabrian dialect. It's not on the radio. It's not in a book. It's a song about a stubborn bird that freezes to death. He stopped, his jaw clenching so hard, a muscle twitched near his ear. He forced the words out. "My mother used to sing it. Before she died." Claire stared at him. The panic in her chest flared into a wildfire. "Tell me where you heard it," Leo demanded, his voice dropping into a dangerous quiet register. Right now, Claire's mind raced. She couldn't protect the secret anymore. She couldn't protect herself. the hospice, the debt, the old woman. It all flooded back. Boston. She choked out her voice, barely audible over the rain lashing against the windows. 5 years ago, Leo stared at her, the rain dripping from his jaw. He didn't blink. What in Boston? A hospice center. Claire said the words, spilling out rapidly, now desperate to appease him. St. Jude's. I was working the night shift, mopping floors. There was an old woman. Leo dropped her arm. He took a step back as if she had struck him. He looked at his own hand, then back at her. Describe her. She was small, Claire said, rubbing her arm unconsciously. Frail. She had a burned scar on the left side of her neck. She didn't speak English well. The nurses ignored her. I used to sit with her when I took my breaks. The silence in the library was absolute. The grandfather clock in the corner ticked. Leo Rossi, the man who controlled half the ports on the eastern seaboard, who ordered executions with a nod of his head, looked like the floor had just vanished beneath his feet. He walked slowly to the heavy leather armchair by the fireplace and sat down heavily, staring into the dead, cold ashes. Did she have a name? He asked quietly. Claire swallowed. She told the nurses her name was Rosa. But Leo's head snapped toward her. But what? When she was confused. When the painkillers were too strong, she would talk in her sleep. She called herself Katerina. The name hung in the air. Leo closed his eyes. A long, shuddering breath escaped his lips. Leave, he said. Claire didn't need to be told twice. She grabbed her cart, abandoning her supplies on the ladder, and hurried toward the door. Wait. She froze her hand on the brass doorknob. Tomorrow. Leo said, his eyes still closed, his voice stripped of all emotion. You don't clean. You come here. You sit in that chair. And you tell me every single word she ever said to you. The next day, the estate felt different. The physical structure was the same, the cold marble, the silent staff, the lurking guards. But the air was charged. Claire spent the morning in an agony of anticipation. She wore her grey uniform, but Mrs. Gable didn't hand her a mop. Mr. Rossi requested you in the library at noon, the head housekeeper had said, her eyes narrowed with suspicion. I don't know what you did, Claire, but if you brought trouble to this house, I'll make sure Tommy pays for it. Claire didn't respond. She just watched the clock. At exactly noon, she knocked on the heavy oak doors of the library. Come in. Leo was sitting at his massive desk. The room was brighter today, the storm having passed sunlight, cutting through the tall windows and illuminating the dust motes dancing in the air. He wore a crisp white shirt, cuffs rolled up exposing the dark ink of tattoos on his forearms. He looked entirely in control again. The frantic man from the night before had been locked away in a box, but as Claire walked in and stood awkwardly in front of the desk, she noticed the ashtray. It was overflowing. Leo didn't smoke. Sit, he said, gesturing to a leather chair opposite him. Claire sat. The leather squeaked under her weight. She kept her hands folded in her lap, pressing her thumbs into her cuticles to keep from shaking. Leo poured 2 glasses of water from a crystal pitcher on his desk. He pushed one toward her. Drink. You look like you're going to pass out. She took a sip. It was freezing cold. Katerina Rossi died in a car fire in 1998. Leo began, his voice flat analytical. I was 12 years old. The police found the wreck at the bottom of a ravine in upstate New York. Dental records confirmed it. My father buried a closed casket. Claire stayed perfectly still. She knew better than to interrupt a man laying out the pieces of his own tragedy. For 20 years I have visited a grave with a piece of charred bone inside. Leo continued. He leaned forward, resting his elbows on the desk, clasping his hands together. And now a housekeeper, I barely know, hums a song that my mother swore she made up herself, tweaking an old folk tune. And this housekeeper tells me A woman with a burn scar on her neck died in Boston 5 years ago. He locked eyes with her. The intensity was physical. Do you understand the position you are in, Claire? She nodded slowly. You think I'm lying? I think, Leo corrected softly, that if you are lying, I will find out, and it will end poorly for you. But if you are telling the truth— He trailed off, looking away toward the window. If you are telling the truth, then my father lied to me. My family lied to me. And my mother spent the last years of her life hiding in a hospice center while I mourned her. He looked back at her. So, tell me about the woman in Boston. From the beginning. Claire took a breath. The memory was dusty, shoved in a box in the back of her mind, along with all the other painful things she tried to forget. I took the night shifts because they paid $1 more an hour. She started, her voice surprisingly steady. St. Jude's was underfunded. Most of the patients there didn't have families. They were wards of the state. Rosa Katerina arrived in November. She had stage 4 pancreatic cancer. Leo flinched. It was a micro-expression barely there, but Claire saw it. The tightening of the mouth, the slight narrowing of the eyes. She was terrified, Claire said softly, abandoning the clinical tone and speaking to the man underneath the Mafia boss exterior. She barely spoke. She refused to eat. The nurses were rough with her because she wouldn't cooperate. I started bringing her tea. Just chamomile. I'd leave it on her nightstand. Why, Leo asked. Because she looked lonely, Claire said simply. And I know what that looks like. Leo stared at her, really looking at her for the first time. He noticed the cheap, sensible shoes, the faded grey fabric of her uniform, the bruised, raw skin of her knuckles. He saw a survivor. Go on, he said softly. After a few weeks, she started talking to me, mostly about the weather. But then the pain got worse. They upped her morphine. Claire looked down at her hands. That's when she started singing the song. She said it was to keep the cold away. I asked her who she was singing it for. Leo leaned in, barely breathing. What did she say? She said she was singing it for her little lion. Claire looked up, meeting his eyes. She said her little lion was trapped in a cage and she couldn't get him out. Leo's breath hitched. Leon. Little lion. It was what she used to call him. He pushed back from the desk, standing up abruptly. His chair scraped violently against the hardwood. He walked to the window, turning his back to her. Claire watched his shoulders heave. He braced his hands against the window frame, his head bowed. Silence stretched in the room, thick and suffocating. Claire didn't move. She hardly breathed. She was witnessing the dismantling of a man who held the city in a chokehold. Minutes passed. When Leo finally turned around, his eyes were red-rimmed, but his face was set in stone. The vulnerability was gone, replaced by a terrifying, cold resolve. Did she ever mention my father? He asked. No, Claire said. She only ever talked about you. She said she had to leave to keep you safe, that the fire was the only way. She faked her own death, Leo murmured, putting the pieces together. My father was a monster. He was paranoid. He thought she was talking to the feds. She knew he was going to kill her, so she beat him to it. He walked back to the desk, not sitting down, but standing over it, looking down at Claire. When she died, Leo said, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. Who handled her belongings? The state, Claire said. But she didn't have much. Just the clothes she came in with. She hesitated, biting her lower lip. Leo caught the hesitation instantly. What are you hiding? She gave me something. Claire admitted, her heart hammering. The night before she passed, she forced it into my hand. She told me to keep it hidden. Leo walked around the desk until he was standing directly in front of her chair. He crouched down, bringing his face level with hers. "What did she give you, Claire?" "A key," Claire whispered. "A safe deposit box key from a bank in Manhattan." Leo stared at her, the realization washing over him. His mother hadn't just run. She had taken something. Insurance. Leverage. And this woman, this terrified housekeeper, was holding the one piece of evidence that could blow his entire family's legacy to ashes. "Do you have it?" he asked. "It's in my apartment," Claire said. "Hidden?" Leo stood up. He adjusted his cuffs, his mind moving at 1,000 miles an hour. He looked down at her, the dynamic shifting completely. She was no longer invisible. She was the most important person in his world. "You're not a housekeeper anymore," Leo said. "As of right now, you belong to me. You don't leave this estate without my say-so. You don't speak to anyone about this." Claire stood up, panic rising. "My brother!" "Your brother's debt is wiped clean," Leo interrupted. "Tommy is safe. But you are going to take me to that apartment, you are going to give me that key, and then—" He paused, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "Then we are going to find out exactly what my mother died to protect." The drive to Queens took 40 minutes. The silence in the back of the armored SUV lasted exactly that long. Claire stared out the tinted window, watching the blur of streetlights smear across the wet glass. Leo sat beside her. He didn't look at his phone. He didn't give orders to the driver or the broad-shouldered man named Dominic in the passenger seat. He just stared straight ahead, a statue carved from tension and expensive wool. They pulled up to a curb lined with overflowing trash cans and cars missing hubcaps. It was a brick tenement building, the kind that smelled perpetually of boiled cabbage and damp concrete. Dominic moved to open the door, but Leo was already out. "Stay with the car," Leo told the bodyguard. Dominic frowned, a thick scarred ridge above his eye bunching. "Boss protocol says—" "I don't give a damn what protocol says." Leo cut him off. His voice wasn't raised, but it carried the weight of a physical blow. "Stay with the car." Claire led the way inside. The fluorescent lights in the stairwell flickered, buzzing like a dying insect. They climbed. First floor, second floor, third. Leo's leather shoes were silent on the linoleum. Claire's rubber soles squeaked. She was acutely aware of the contrast between them. He owned skyscrapers. She lived in a box where the heating only worked on Tuesdays. She unlocked the door to apartment 4B. The deadbolt stuck. She had to put her shoulder into the wood to force it open. "Tommy," she called out, stepping into the cramped living room. The apartment was suffocatingly small. A worn sofa, a television with a cracked frame, and a kitchen counter cluttered with past-due notices. The air felt heavy stale with the scent of unwashed laundry and cheap beer. Tommy was slumped on the sofa. He was 22, but he looked 40. His skin had a grey, translucent quality, and his hands shook as he pushed himself up. His eyes, bloodshot and frantic, darted from Claire to the massive, impeccably dressed man standing behind her. "Claire, what is this?" Tommy slurred, his panic spiking instantly. He backed into the corner, tripping over a pile of magazines. "I swear to God, I paid the installment. Gable said I was good until Friday. Who is he? Is he a collector?" Leo didn't say a word. He stepped fully into the apartment and closed the door behind him. The lock clicked. In this tiny space, Leo was a leviathan. He scanned the room, his dark eyes cataloguing the squalor, the fear, the pathetic reality of Tommy's existence. Claire moved quickly, stepping between her brother and her boss. "Tommy, shut up. Go to your room." "Claire, I said go," she snapped. It was the first time Leo had heard her raise her voice. It was raspy, desperate, and fiercely protective. Tommy swallowed hard, eyeing Leo one last time, before scuttling down the narrow hallway and slamming his bedroom door. Claire let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. She turned back to Leo. He was watching her. He wasn't judging the apartment. He was judging her. He was looking at the burden she carried, realizing exactly why a sharp, capable woman let herself become invisible to scrub his flaws. "Where is it?" he asked quietly. Claire walked into the tiny kitchen. She opened the cabinet under the sink, bypassed the cleaning supplies, and reached for a rusted, disconnected radiator pipe running along the back wall. She dug her fingernails into the peeling paint, prying loose a small, loose brick behind the pipe. She reached into the dark cavity and pulled out a small rectangular object wrapped in a plastic grocery bag. She unwrapped it on the counter. It was a brass key, heavy and dull with age, stamped with a serial number and the logo of a private holding bank in Manhattan. Leo stared at the key. He didn't reach for it. He looked at it like it was a live grenade. "She told me," Claire said, softly, breaking the heavy silence, "that if anyone ever came looking for her, I should throw it in the river. But if someone came looking for you, I should give it to them." Leo finally reached out. His large fingers closed around the cold brass. He pocketed it in his suit jacket. "Pack a bag," he said. Claire blinked. "What?" "You're not staying here tonight," Leo said, his tone leaving zero room for negotiation. "You think my mother hid this for 20 years just for it to be a harmless stack of cash? Whatever is in that box is dangerous enough that she faked her death to hide it. Now I know about it. And you know about it. Tommy, Dominic is staying outside. No one touches this building. But you are coming with me." Leo stepped closer, forcing her to look up at him. "You are the only person alive who spoke to her at the end. You are not leaving my sight, Claire. Pack a bag." The First Manhattan Depository didn't look like a bank. It looked like an art gallery. High ceilings, polished black granite floors, and absolutely zero teller windows. It was a fortress for the people who owned the city. It was 4 p.m. The rain had started again. Leo bypassed the reception desk entirely, walking straight toward the frosted glass doors in the back. A sharply dressed manager, Mr. Hayes, stepped out, a polite but firm smile plastered on his face. "Mr. Rossi, what a surprise. We didn't have you scheduled for a visitation today. Unfortunately, the vaults require a 24-hour..." Leo didn't slow down. He didn't raise his voice. He just kept walking, forcing the manager to step backward or be trampled. "Box 4082. Mr. Hayes blanched. "Sir, you know the protocols. That box is not registered to your name. It's registered to Caterina Bianchi," Leo said, using his mother's maiden name. He pulled the brass key from his pocket and held it up. "She's deceased. I am her sole heir. Open the vault, Hayes, or I buy this building tomorrow and turn it into a parking garage. Your choice." Hayes looked at the key, then at Leo's eyes. He swallowed his smile. "Right this way, sir." Claire trailed a step behind Leo, feeling entirely out of place in her cheap coat and scuffed shoes. The security gate slid open with a heavy pneumatic hiss. They took an elevator down 3 floors into the bedrock of Manhattan. The vault was a long, sterile corridor, lined with brushed steel doors. Hayes led them to the end of row 4. He inserted his master key, nodded for Leo to insert his, and turned them simultaneously. A heavy click echoed down the hall. Hayes stepped back. "I will give you privacy." He practically sprinted back to the elevator. Leo stood in front of the open slot. Inside sat a long, heavy steel box. He didn't pull it out immediately. He braced his hand against the cold metal of the wall, his head bowed. For a brief second, the Mafia boss shattered, and Claire saw the 12-year-old boy who had buried an empty coffin. She didn't speak. She just stood there, holding the silence for him. Leo took a deep breath, his features hardening. He pulled the box free, carried it to a small viewing table in the center of the room, and flipped the latches. The lid groaned open. There was no money, no jewelry. Inside sat 2 items: a thick black leather-bound ledger and a sealed envelope with a single word written on it in faded blue ink lay on. Leo picked up the envelope. His thumb brushed over his mother's handwriting. His hand was remarkably steady for a man whose world was actively caving in. He broke the wax seal, pulled out a single sheet of stationery, and read. Claire watched his face. She saw the exact moment his heart broke, and the exact moment it calcified into something infinitely more dangerous. His jaw locked. His eyes, usually a calm, calculating brown, turned pitch black. He didn't speak. He gently placed the letter back into the box. Then he reached for the ledger. He flipped it open to a random page, lists of names, dates, and numbers. But it wasn't a financial ledger. Leo traced a finger down the page. March 12th, 1995. Frank Russo. 2 shots to the back of the head. Blamed on the Irish. Leo looked up at Claire, his voice devoid of all warmth. Frank Russo was my father's best friend. He was my godfather. He flipped to another page. October 4th, 1996. The docks explosion. 4 men dead. My father ordered the hit. He told the families it was the feds cracking down. Leo closed the book with a sharp snap that echoed like a gunshot in the vault. "What is it?" Claire whispered. "It's a confession," Leo said softly. My father was a paranoid butcher. He didn't just kill his enemies. He killed his allies, his capos, his friends. He kept a record of every false flag, every betrayal, every lie he told the commission to keep power. And my mother found it. Claire felt the blood drain from her face. Even she knew how the syndicate worked. Loyalty was the only currency that mattered. "If the other families see that," Claire started, "if the other families see this, there will be a war that burns this city to the ground," Leo finished. "My family's empire is built on a mountain of murdered friends. If this gets out, every man on my payroll, every ally I have, will turn their guns on me by morning." He looked at the letter again. "She didn't run because she was afraid of him killing her," Leo murmured. "She ran because she was afraid of him killing me. She took his insurance policy. She crippled him. He spent the last 10 years of his life looking for a ghost because he knew if she ever gave this to the commission, we were dead." He picked up the ledger and the letter, shoving them inside his coat. He closed the steel box and shoved it back into the wall. He turned to Claire. The intensity radiating off him was blinding. "My father's old crew, the men who helped him do these things. They still work for me," Leo said, his voice a low, lethal hum. "They run my security. They run my house." Claire's breath hitched. "The estate is compromised," Leo confirmed. "They've been watching me for years, waiting to see if I ever found out what my mother took. Waiting to see if I was a threat." He closed the distance between them, grasping her shoulders. His touch was firm, grounding her in the spinning room. "You can never go back to that house, Claire. If they realize you led me to this, they won't just kill you. They will take weeks to do it. They didn't go back to the estate. They didn't go back to Queens." Leo gave the driver an address in the meatpacking district, an industrial loft registered under a shell corporation used exclusively for ghosts and emergencies. The ride was agonizingly tense. Leo made 3 phone calls. He spoke in rapid coded Italian. He wasn't asking for updates. He was repositioning chess pieces. He was pulling loyalists close and isolating the old guard, preparing for a slaughter. When they arrived at the loft, it was pitch black outside. The space was massive, all exposed brick steel beams and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking the Hudson River. It felt cold, unlived in. Leo locked the heavy steel door behind them and engaged a deadbolt that looked like it belonged on a bank vault. He walked straight to a wet bar in the corner, grabbed a bottle of scotch and poured 2 glasses. He didn't ask if she wanted one. He walked over, pressed a glass into her hand, and downed his own in a single swallow. He walked to the window, staring out at the black water of the river. Claire stood in the center of the room. She was holding her small duffel bag in one hand and a crystal glass of $1,000 scotch in the other. Her grey uniform felt absurd in this multi-million-dollar fortress. She set her bag down. She walked over to the kitchen island, set the glass down, and looked at him. The adrenaline was fading, leaving behind a bone-deep exhaustion. She watched the man who controlled New York's underworld lean his forehead against the cold glass of the window, his shoulders slumped. He wasn't a boss right now. He was a son who had just realized his entire life was a lie. "You're bleeding," Claire said. Leo didn't move. "What?" "Your hand." He looked down. When he had gripped the steel door of the vault, he had gripped it so hard he'd split the skin across his knuckles. Blood was seeping into his cuff. He stared at it, as if it belonged to someone else. Claire didn't ask for permission. She walked into the adjacent bathroom, opened the mirrored cabinet, and found a basic first aid kit. She brought it out, setting it on the kitchen island. "Come here," she said. Leo turned, his eyes narrowing slightly. He wasn't used to being given orders, especially not by staff. But Claire wasn't staff anymore. The hierarchy had burned down the moment she handed him that key. He walked over, slowly looming over her. She didn't flinch. She took his massive hand in hers. Her fingers were small, scarred from chemical burns and hot water, but they were steady. She wiped away the blood with an antiseptic wipe. He hissed slightly as the alcohol hit the cut. "You're lucky you didn't need stitches," Claire murmured, keeping her eyes on her work. "I've survived worse," Leo rasped. "I know." She applied a thin layer of ointment. "But you don't have to bleed out just to prove it." Leo looked down at her. Really looked at her. Her brown hair was escaping its severe knot, framing a face that was tired, pale, and entirely resolute. There was no fear in her eyes anymore. The terrified woman on the library ladder was gone. In her place was someone who understood survival just as well as he did. Only she fought her wars with mops and rent money instead of guns. "Why did you tell me?" Leo asked softly, the silence of the loft wrapping around them. "Last night, I asked about the song. You could have lied. You could have said it was just a tune. You could have protected yourself." Claire wrapped a clean bandage around his knuckles, tying it off neatly. She let go of his hand, but she didn't step back. "I tried to," she admitted, looking up into his dark eyes. "But I saw your face. My face. You looked—" She searched for the word. "You looked like someone had ripped your heart out of your chest and you were trying to figure out how to keep breathing without it. I know what that feels like. I couldn't lie to you." Leo stared at her. In his world, empathy was a weakness. It was a flaw to be exploited. But standing here in this cold, empty loft, looking at this woman who had risked her own life to give him the truth about his mother, it didn't feel like a weakness. It felt like an anchor. He reached up, slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away. When she didn't, his hand brushed against her cheek. His thumb traced the dark circle under her eye. His touch was incredibly gentle, a stark contrast to the violence he was planning in his head. "I am going to tear this city apart," Leo whispered, his voice vibrating with a terrifying promise. "I am going to kill the men who helped my father. I am going to burn his legacy to ash." He paused, his hand moving to cup the back of her neck, pulling her just a fraction closer. The warmth of his skin seeped into hers. "And when it starts, everyone around me becomes a target. You should be terrified of me, Claire." Claire looked up at him. She felt the heavy, dangerous pulse of his thumb against her pulse point. She was standing in the epicenter of a hurricane. But for the first time in her life, she didn't feel like she was drowning. "I was terrified of you yesterday," Claire said quietly, holding his gaze. But yesterday you were just a man who owned my brother's life. Today you're the man who's going to save it." Leo's eyes darkened, the last shred of his composure slipping. He leaned in the distance between them, vanishing, the air growing hot and thin. "I'm not a savior." "Claire," he breathed, his lips inches from hers. "I'm a monster waking up." The sun didn't rise so much as it leaked through the smog, painting the meatpacking district in bruised shades of purple and grey. Claire hadn't slept. She sat at the kitchen island, a cold mug of coffee cradled in her hands, watching Leo orchestrate a massacre. He didn't yell, he didn't pace. He sat at the long, reclaimed wood dining table with 3 disposable cell phones lined up in front of him. He looked like a stockbroker having a busy morning, except the commodities he was trading were human lives. "Cut the feed to the Brooklyn docks," Leo said into the first phone. His voice was a low mechanical rasp. "If Carmine's crew tries to move the containers, lock the gates. Anyone who argues gets a broken jaw. If they pull a weapon, drop them." He hung up immediately, picking up the second phone. "The accounts are frozen," he asked. A pause. "Good. Tell the offshore handlers that any wire transfer originating from my uncle's holding company is flagged as hostile. Yes. Drain the shell accounts. Leave them with nothing but the cash in their pockets." Claire watched the bandage on his hand flex as he gripped the plastic phones. She was witnessing the structural collapse of a criminal empire executed with the terrifying efficiency of a corporate merger. The ledger sat open on the table between them. The Book of Ghosts. Leo had spent the hours between midnight and dawn cross-referencing his father's handwritten confessions with the current payroll. He was identifying every capo, every lieutenant, every street boss who had been complicit in the false flags and the murders of their own people. He wasn't just killing his enemies. He was amputating his own infrastructure. By 8 in the morning, the silence in the loft was interrupted only by the buzzing of phones and the distant wail of police sirens across the river. The purge had begun. Leo finally put the last phone down. He rubbed his face with both hands, a long, ragged exhale escaping his chest. He looked across the room at Claire. The physical distance between them was 20 feet, but the energetic distance was non-existent. "You should eat," he said, his voice softer, now the lethal edge dialed back. "I'm not hungry," Claire replied truthfully. Her stomach was tied into a complex knot of adrenaline and dread. She gestured toward the ledger. "How many?" 14, Leo said flatly. 14 men who sit at my table, drink my wine, and swear loyalty to me, knowing they helped my father butcher this family's foundation. Can you survive cutting out 14 of your top men in one morning? "I don't have a choice," Leo said. He stood up, walking into the kitchen area. He stood beside her, leaning his hip against the counter. He smelled like stale, coffee metallic stress and expensive cologne. "If I don't bleed them out today, they will realize I have the ledger by tomorrow. And then I'm the one who ends up in a car fire." He poured himself a glass of water, drinking it down in one go. "I sent a crew to your brother's apartment," Leo said, setting the glass down. Claire went rigid. The coffee mug clattered against the granite counter. "What you said, Tommy was safe. He is," Leo corrected, immediately holding a hand up to pacify her. "I sent a crew to pack his things. He's currently on a private charter, headed for a clinic in Arizona. Paid in full for 6 months. Detox rehab therapy. Clean slate." Claire stared at him, her chest tightening. The debt that had dictated her entire existence, the suffocating weight she had carried for 3 years, evaporated in a single sentence. "Why?" she whispered. "Because a man with a debt is leverage," Leo said, his dark eyes locking onto hers. "And as of yesterday, you are the most valuable asset I have. I can't have anyone using him to get to you." It was a cold, pragmatic explanation, but the way he looked at her told a different story. He hadn't just eliminated a vulnerability. He had given her freedom. "Thank you," Claire managed to say, her throat tight. Leo reached out his bandaged hand, brushing a stray lock of hair behind her ear. His fingers lingered on the nape of her neck. "Don't thank me yet." "The day isn't over." One of the phones on the table buzzed. It was a sharp, angry sound. Leo stepped away, the boss taking over again. He picked it up. He didn't speak. He just listened. Claire watched his posture change. The slight relaxation in his shoulders vanished, replaced by a rigid, violent tension. His jaw clenched so hard she could hear the teeth grind from across the room. "Understood," Leo said quietly. He hung up. He didn't look at the phone. He looked at the heavy steel door of the loft. "What is it?" Claire asked, her instincts flaring. "That was Dominic," Leo said. Claire frowned. "The bodyguard, I thought you told him to wait in Queens." "I did." Leo reached under his suit jacket, drawing a heavy matte black pistol from a shoulder holster. He checked the chamber with a sharp mechanical click. "But Dominic didn't stay in Queens. He just called to tell me the perimeter is secure." Claire felt a cold sweat break out on her palms. So, Leo said, his eyes dead and focused. "I never gave Dominic the address to this safe house. He was my father's man before he was mine." He walked over to a steel panel on the wall, punching in a code. The heavy metal shutters over the floor-to-ceiling windows began to slide down with a grinding mechanical hum, plunging the loft into artificial twilight. He tracked the car. Leo muttered more to himself than to her. He grabbed Claire's arm, pulling her away from the kitchen island and toward the concrete load-bearing pillar in the center of the room. "Get down! Do not move!" The attack didn't start with a shout or a warning. It started with a sound like tearing metal. The reinforced steel door of the loft buckled inward. The deadbolt shrieked against the frame, bending but not breaking. Someone had attached a localized breaching charge to the hinges. Dust rained down from the ceiling. The smell of pulverized concrete and sulfur flooded the room. Leo shoved Claire down behind the thick concrete pillar. He didn't crouch with her. He moved with a terrifying, fluid grace toward the heavy oak dining table. With one brutal heave, he flipped it onto its side, creating a barricade facing the door. "Keep your head down and cover your ears." Leo ordered, his voice echoing in the large space. Another deafening crack. The hinges gave way. The heavy door blew inward, crashing onto the hardwood floor in a cloud of grey smoke. Through the haze, figures moved. 3 men dressed in tactical gear carrying suppressed submachine guns. This wasn't a mob hit. This was a paramilitary execution squad. Carmine had called in outside contractors. Leo didn't wait for the smoke to clear. He fired. The heavy boom of his pistol was deafening in the enclosed space. The lead man in the doorway dropped instantly. A clean hole punched through the visor of his helmet. The other 2 scattered, diving behind the leather sofas in the living area. The air was instantly filled with the snapping hiss of suppressed gunfire. Bullets chewed through the drywall, shattering the wet bar, and sending a rain of expensive scotch and crystal raining down onto the floor. Claire pressed her hands over her ears, curling her body into the smallest target possible. Her heart was beating so fast it felt like a continuous vibration in her chest. She squeezed her eyes shut, but the flashes of muzzle fire painted the back of her eyelids. She had lived her whole life around the threat of violence, but it had always been a shadow, a bruised face, a whispered threat. This was the raw, unfiltered reality of Leo Rossi's world. Clack, clack, clack. Leo fired 3 more times. A man screamed, a wet, gurgling sound that was abruptly cut short. 2 down, Leo called out, his voice unnervingly calm. 1 left. Silence descended on the loft, heavy and ringing. The smell of copper blood mixed with the sulfur. Claire opened her eyes. She was pressed against the floor, her cheek resting on the cold hardwood. From her vantage point, she could see under the overturned dining table. She could see Leo's leather shoes. She could also see a pair of combat boots moving slowly, silently along the far wall. The remaining shooter was flanking Leo's position, using the kitchen island as cover. Leo was focused on the sofa, waiting for the man to break cover. He didn't know the shooter had crawled around the perimeter. Claire's throat seized. If she yelled, she would draw the shooter's fire. If she did nothing, Leo was dead. She didn't think. She reacted with the muscle memory of a woman who had spent years fixing broken things in cheap apartments. Her eyes darted around. 3 feet away lay the shattered remains of the wet bar, specifically a heavy, jagged shard from the base of a crystal decanter. She army crawled out from behind the concrete pillar. The floor was covered in broken glass. It bit into her knees and the palms of her hands, slicing through her grey uniform, but she didn't stop. She reached the shard of crystal, wrapping her bleeding fingers around the smooth edge. The shooter was rounding the kitchen island. He was 10 feet away from Leo's blind spot, raising his weapon. Claire pushed herself up into a crouch. She didn't scream. She threw the heavy crystal shard with everything she had, aiming not for the man, but for the large, brushed steel refrigerator behind him. The crystal struck the metal with a sharp, ringing crack. The shooter flinched instinctively, spinning his weapon toward the sudden noise behind him. It was a distraction that lasted less than a second. But for a man like Leo Rossi, a second was a lifetime. Leo pivoted. He saw the shooter in the open. He fired twice. Center mass. The man crumpled to the floor, his weapon clattering harmlessly against the granite counter. The loft was dead silent again, save for the hum of the air conditioning. Leo stood up slowly, keeping his gun trained on the bodies. He kicked the weapons away. He checked their pulses. Dead. He turned and looked at Claire. She was kneeling in a pool of scotch and broken glass. Her hands were covered in blood. Her grey dress was torn. She was shaking violently, the adrenaline crash hitting her nervous system like a freight train. Leo dropped the gun on the counter and crossed the room in 2 strides. He dropped to his knees in the glass, not caring as it cut through his trousers. He grabbed her shoulders, pulling her roughly into his chest. "Are you hit?" he demanded, his hands frantically roaming over her back, her arms checking for bullet wounds. "Claire, talk to me. Are you hit?" "No," she gasped, burying her face in the expensive wool of his suit jacket. "No, I'm okay. It's just my hands." Leo pulled back slightly, looking at her bleeding palms. The fierce, calculated monster who had just executed 3 men vanished. His eyes were wide, frantic, identical to the look he had given her in the library when she first hummed that song. "You saved my life," he whispered, his voice cracking. "You stupid, brave woman. You broke cover. He had an angle on you," Claire managed to say, her teeth chattering. "I couldn't just watch." Leo didn't say anything else. He pulled her flush against him, burying his face in her neck, holding her so tightly she could feel the heavy, erratic thud of his heart. He anchored her. She anchored him. Amidst the blood and the cordite in the ruins of his father's legacy, they clung to each other. "It's over," Leo breathed against her skin. "I promise you it's over." The cleanup crew arrived 20 minutes later. They were Leo's personal guard men, who had been vetted not by his father, but by Leo himself over the past 5 years. They moved silently, bagging the bodies, scrubbing the floor, and replacing the destroyed door with a temporary steel plate. By noon, the loft smelled strongly of bleach, entirely masking the scent of death. Claire sat on the edge of the large bed in the master suite. Her hands were bandaged, washed clean of the blood and glass. She wore a clean, oversized black t-shirt she had found in Leo's closet. Her grey uniform was in a trash bag in the corner, ruined beyond repair. She had stared at it for a long time before throwing it away. She wasn't a housekeeper anymore. Leo walked into the bedroom. He had changed into dark jeans and a plain black Henley. The bruising on his knuckles looked worse, but the cold, calculating mask of the Mafia boss was completely stripped away. He looked exhausted. He looked human. He held a glass of water and 2 white pills. He handed them to her. "Ibuprofen," he said, "for the swelling." Claire swallowed the pills. She looked up at him. "Did you finish it?" Leo nodded slowly. He sat down on the edge of the bed next to her, staring at the floor. "Carmine is dead. Dominic is dead. The remaining capos who were loyal to the old regime surrendered their territories an hour ago. The ledger did its job. They saw the proof of my father's betrayals and the old guard fractured. The family is mine now. Completely." He reached into his pocket and pulled out the thick black leather ledger. He stared at it for a long moment. This book had cost his mother her life. It had built a mountain of corpses. Leo stood up. He walked over to the modern gas-powered fireplace built into the wall. He clicked the ignition switch. A line of blue flames hissed to life. Without a word, Leo tossed the ledger into the fire. Claire watched as the thick pages caught curling black and orange, as 20 years of extortion, murder, and betrayal turned to ash. "You're burning your leverage," Claire said softly. "I'm burning his legacy," Leo corrected, watching the flames reflect in his dark eyes. "I will not rule this city through the ghosts of my father's sins. I will build my own infrastructure. On my terms." He turned away from the fire, looking at Claire. The silence stretched between them, heavy with the weight of the last 24 hours. "You're free," Leo said, his voice quiet in the large room. "Your brother is safe. Your debt is gone. I have an account set up in your name. There's enough money in it for you to go anywhere in the world. You don't ever have to clean another floor. You don't ever have to look over your shoulder." Claire stared at him. She looked at the man who had terrified her yesterday, who had bled for her today, and who was now offering her the one thing she had never possessed a choice. "And if I leave?" Claire asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "What happens to you?" Leo swallowed hard. He looked away, the vulnerability laid bare. "I rebuild. I run the city. I go back to being the man in the dark." He looked back at her, his eyes entirely unguarded. "But it will be much colder without you." Claire looked down at her bandaged hands. She thought about the empty apartment in Queens. She thought about the life of invisibility she had cultivated. It felt like a lifetime ago. She didn't want to be invisible anymore. Not to him. She stood up. The oversized shirt fell to her mid-thigh. She walked slowly across the room, stopping inches from him. "I told you," Claire said, her voice steady. "I know what lonely looks like, and I'm done being lonely." Leo's breath hitched. He reached out his large, bruised hands, gently gripping her waist, pulling her flush against him. He buried his face in the crook of her neck, breathing in the scent of her skin, the remnants of the soap, the absolute reality of her presence. "Are you sure?" he rasped against her collarbone. "My world is dark, Claire. It is violent, and it is dark." "Then I'll leave a light on," she whispered, tangling her fingers in his dark hair. He lifted his head, his dark eyes burning with a fierce, possessive devotion. He kissed her. It wasn't rushed or violent. It was a slow, deliberate, claiming a promise sealed in the ashes of the old world. Claire kissed him back, pouring every ounce of her survival, her pain, and her fierce, quiet strength into the connection. The syndicate boss and the housekeeper were dead. In their place stood a king and the only woman who knew how to temper his fire. The war was over, but their reign was just beginning. From the invisible housekeeper to the queen of the underworld, Claire proved that survival isn't just about hiding, it's about knowing when to break cover. Leo burned his father's empire to the ground, but with Claire by his side, they are about to build something truly unbreakable, Did you expect that insane ambush in the safe house? What do you think Leo's next move as the undisputed boss will be? Drop a like, leave your thoughts in the comments below, and make sure you subscribe to the channel so you never miss another dark, pulse-pounding Mafia romance story. Thanks for listening.